When Empire star Taraji Henson stepped out on the stage at this year's BET Awards ceremony in this show-stopping dress, probably the last thing that anyone was expecting to hear come out of her mouth was a powerful and loud speech about a presidential transition plan written by the Conservative Heritage Foundation. But that's what we got. She even said, "Look, I know I look good, but it's time for you all to pay attention to Project 2025. For more than a year now, we've been hearing admonitions in the news that we should all try to read the 2025 project. But realistically, it's 900 pages long, and frankly, it doesn't read like Moby Dick or Gone with the Wind. Its chapters about how to revamp the federal government from top to bottom were written by 36 different conservative thinkers, 26 of whom served on the first Trump administration, some of whom had to do their writing from prison cells. Even though Trump claims to have no association with this huge document, clearly it was written for his use by his own team, who hoped to hit the ground running in a second Trump administration, accomplishing things he didn't even dare to dream in his first and very chaotic White House administration. Trump is trying to distance himself from this manifesto, which was written by his friends and associates, but you can't believe the lies. Trump is actually mentioned by name on 190 pages of this tome. So don't believe him when he tries to say he doesn't know anything about it. It was written for him and for his use by his hand-picked conservative leaders. Still, who among us really wants to ruin a perfectly good day by reading the political musings of people like Peter Navarro and Ken Cuccinelli? I know I don't, but if you had the moral strength to look up into Taraji Henson's eyes, you would have seen her fury when she loudly demanded that we all look it up. So I did. The 2025 project is important, but folks, it is also very frightening. It contradicts the values that we spiritual people who believe in freedom and justice and equality and compassion, and we must suffer a bit to be more aware of what the right wing of American politics would like to turn this country into and turn its government into as it turns its back on children and those who are in need. There are 4 pillars to the Heritage Foundation's mandate for leadership. This book is the outline of its goals and objectives. The second pillar is a kind of LinkedIn-style catalog of names of people who have their ideology who can be hired by the new administration immediately. The third pillar is a kind of conservative academy set up to train the conservative neophytes in how to run the government the way they want it run. And the fourth is a literal playbook outlining the steps to be taken in each governmental department in order to fire the people they want to get rid of and bring in the people with the priorities that the Trump administration wants to fulfill. Kevin Roberts, the current director of the Heritage Foundation and former president of the Hair Growth for Men Club, outlines their objectives in the foreword with 4 goals that have to be interpreted carefully to get past his kind of sweet-sounding, seductive language. He says that we are in the midst of a second American Revolution, which, he added, could be bloodless if the left allows it to be, which is to say, they won't shoot us if we don't resist. The first of his objectives says, restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children. In the details of the book, we learn how this will be done by closing the education department, allowing the book-burning far-right Christians to control school curriculum, even suggesting that librarians who keep books in the library that affirm homosexuality or gender assignment be listed as pedophiles and imprisoned. They also want to do away with not only the abortion pill, but with contraception and even no-fault divorce, forcing even violent and toxic families to stay together forever. They also want to make pornography illegal, putting those who produce it and sell it in jail, and you can bet that that would mean anything that portrayed homosexuality or transgender or gender changes as being normal would be construed as being pornography. And they want to even ban in vitro fertilization for reasons that I can't even guess. I don't even know what they've got against that. But they seem to believe that they could legislate sexual orientation and control pregnancy, which is exactly what they intend to do. Their second goal, Roberts describes this way: dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people. In their mind, the administrative state is civil service. Tens of thousands of federal employees who now have job security, whose jobs are not based on politics. But they want to consolidate all authority into the executive branch, into the hands of the president alone, who can dismiss anyone and replace them with puppets who work for him at his whim. They want to take down the intelligence forces, the FBI, the CIA, the agencies that have investigated Trump and his organized crime. Dismantling the administrative state will also do away with most poverty programs, food assistance, public housing, and even Social Security disability, the things that, restrict your freedom, like student loan forgiveness. Like Jesus always said, do your best to punish people for being poor. Robert says that their third value is to defend our sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats, which again, when you dig into the book's details, means not allowing people to come here from Muslim countries. It means stationing our armies on the border with Mexico to defend our border with lethal force, and putting the military in our streets to defend our bounty, which means private businesses that might be being looted or damaged in a protest that would allow the military simply to kill those rioters, as well as shooting shoplifters or anyone else who threatens the assets of the rich. And he ends these lofty goals with the most hypocritical statement of all, saying that they want to secure our God-given individual rights to live freely, what our Constitution calls the blessings of liberty. Now, does that mean that women should be able to exercise their God-given individual right to manage their own reproductive life? No. Obviously, they don't want women to have that liberty. And does it mean that people should be able to love the person of their choice and choose to live in a married relationship with that person? No. Not if you're gay or lesbian or trans or anything that doesn't fit into their rigid cisgender worldview. And does it mean that our children get to exercise the liberty to go to school or a movie theater or a city park without fear of being murdered by some AR-15 wielding lunatic? No, of course not. Even though we have more than 100,000 gun deaths per year in America now, nothing will come between these fanatics and their freedom to own military-style lethal weapons. The blessings of liberty seem to redound only to their very narrowly defined minority of white, privileged conservatives. As the constant speculation about whether Biden is going to drop out of the race after his abysmal debate performance, the news media finally seems to be giving Project 2025 a little more airtime and at least reporting on pieces of it, because what else can you do with a tomb so large but to try to feed it to the public one bad-tasting little bite at a time? Still, I will echo Taraji Henson's emphatic demand that you really must look it up. No one wants to read 900 pages of this fascist stuff, but I encourage you to give it maybe 30 minutes of your time, 3 or 4 days in a row. That's what I've done, just to get a sense of how dangerous this proposed conservative civil war really is. Why do conservative Republicans want to replace what is left of our democracy with an authoritarian, dare we say fascist government, consolidating the power of the president, making him immune to prosecution, and turning our president into a modern-day king, a monarch? People will sometimes turn to an authoritarian leader when they're afraid, if they're afraid of foreign invasion or afraid of an economic depression or some other social disruption. But we're the strongest military nation in the world. We're the strongest economy in the world. Unemployment is at a record low. The stock market is at a record high. What problems are they trying to solve with this reactionary move to erase the social progress made in women's rights, minority rights, gay rights, and ecological protections? What are they afraid of? You undoubtedly have your own answers to that question, but their agenda makes it clear to me that they are afraid of empowering women. They are afraid of racial and religious minorities claiming an equal place in our society, and they are terrified of the normalization of gender and sexual orientation diversity. And they even want to do away with NOAA, the weather service that warns us about hurricanes and tornadoes, because they think they make too much about changes in the environment, so they don't want anything that would slow down the burning of coal and oil. Clearly, for them, making America great again is an appeal to going back to a previous era, maybe back to the 1950s when segregation was legal, abortion was illegal, and gay people were still in the closet. But maybe they want to go back to the early 20th century when women couldn't vote and Jim Crow laws were in force. I wouldn't even be surprised if many of them would love to go back to a pre-Civil War era that included slavery. That may seem to be unthinkable to you right now, but then we've never had a king in America, so we can't predict where the safe boundaries would be in a world where a sociopath like Trump could be made king. It's been a long time since I ever felt the need to anchor every sermon to a passage of Scripture, and I don't feel any compulsion to do that today, but I find the decision of the ancient Judeans to have a king to be relevant to our situation. If you do not remember Israelite history from your Sunday school very well, let me remind you that there was a debate that goes on in the Hebrew Scriptures, both in praise of their famous kings with all the enthronement psalms about David and what have you, and in condemnation of the entire concept of having a king at all. Remember, Moses was a religious leader, but not a king. Joshua was a military leader, but not a king. For the first centuries of Judean history, their leadership came from wise men and women who were called judges. They looked to their tribal and community leaders until they asked their most prominent prophet, Samuel, to choose a king to rule over them. Samuel resisted and took the matter directly to God, who, in the anthropomorphized vision of God that you find in 1 Samuel chapter 8, God was dead set against the idea of having a king in Israel, but God was willing to let the people make their own mistakes. According to the text, God told Samuel to go ahead and do it, but to first give the people this warning. So Samuel reported all of the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers, cooks, and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and courtiers. He will take your male and female slaves and the best of your cattle and donkeys and put them to his work. He will take 1/10 of your flock, and you shall be his slaves. And on that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you on that day." The language is obviously from a small nation that existed 3,000 years ago, but the basic message remains the same. If we let free and fair elections become something that we can simply choose to ignore or to contradict, if we allow our courts to make our leaders impossible to hold accountable to any legal standards, if we empower our executive branch to tax, wage war, and pick a ruling class that has to be supported by the majority of us, we will be sorry we did it. But once you do it, it's very difficult to undo it. As sloppy and inefficient as democracy is, as Winston Churchill famously said, the worst form of government is democracy, except for all of the others. An imperial presidency may scratch the itch for power on the part of those who are afraid of the eclipse of white male privilege, but it's sure to be bad news for everyone else. In this pastor's opinion, we should do whatever we can to help protect our system of democracy with checks and balances and accountability to a moral standard of law that applies to absolutely everyone, even for members of the Supreme Court and whoever happens to be living in the White House. That is, of course, just my opinion, but in this case, my opinion enjoys the status of also being right.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.